said that he would like to see you do more to end the war in Ukraine. Do you think it's appropriate for a royal to make those comments ahead of the visit on Monday?
Prince Harry?
Yes, sir.
How's he doing? How's his wife? Please give him my regards, okay? No, I don't know. I know one thing. Prince Harry is not speaking for the UK. That's for sure.
I am here as a soldier who understands service, as a humanitarian who has seen the human cost of conflict, and as a friend of Ukraine who believes the world must not grow used to this war or numb to its consequences.
Is Prince Harry making a bold move at the Trump administration right before King Charles' big visit next week? The Windsor family appears to have shattered that old never-explain code with a statement that stunned royal watchers everywhere. A senior palace official reportedly dropped major news in a press briefing that sent drama racing from London straight into Washington. Reports suggest the palace has drawn a hard line, with claims Harry has been pushed fully out of the inner circle. As of April 2026, the message looked brutal. No authority to represent the crown, no diplomatic standing, and no clear road back. Then the pressure exploded when Harry made that surprise stop in Kiev, delivering remarks many saw as a direct shot at Trump-era foreign policy.
I think I'm speaking for the UK more than Prince Harry, but I appreciate his advice very much.
Would you have
great
invited
advice
him to the dinner and to the state visit?
Well, I look forward to the dinner. We're having King Charles come. He's a friend of mine. We're really looking forward to it. We've spoken, and we're going to have a great time. I tell you, if I had that ballroom built, it would be filled. I wish we had more seats. Love the UK. I love the UK. I think they made a big mistake on energy. You should open up the North Sea in Aberdeen. You should open it up. And the other thing is they've made a big mistake on immigration.
That move raised eyebrows fast. Critics saw Harry stepping into global power politics, speaking on treaty duties and American leadership like a major statesman, and some insiders framed it as the breaking point for both royal insiders and political heavyweights. Then Trump fired back hard. His response hit like a headline bomb and had people saying Harry was facing serious public embarrassment on the world stage. Trump's pushback was painted as more than politics. It was framed like a takedown of Harry's whole public image. He is not a royal in this country. He represents no one but his own interests. He is a private citizen, Trump said, in remarks that fueled even more controversy. That moment had critics saying the polished royal-style image around Harry was starting to crack. Trump's comments also put heat on what some call the Sussex brand machine in California. For years, Harry and Meghan have been accused by critics of mixing private business influence with royal prestige. But this reaction put focus on where symbolism ends and official power begins. That legal grey zone suddenly became the centre of the storm. Then came the diplomatic angle, and this is where things got even more explosive. Under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, working diplomats and royals on state duties can receive major protections: immunity, exemptions, state-backed security, the whole package. But Trump made one thing clear in this clash: Harry and Meghan do not hold that status. According to that argument, they are not diplomats, and that claim shook up the whole debate.
Well, I'm in DC at the moment, so I was probably about half an hour away from the White House, and last night all it was helicopters in the air, siren was going off. I spoke to a number of people that were at the actual reception. It seems security has been let down very badly, from what I understand. I know that I was at reception at the British Embassy the day before, and people were sort of saying, "Oh, I can get you into the White House. I can get you in." I said, "Well, surely security's not that easy. I've got to go and hire a tux." So I do think the security was very lax. But look, this visit is going to happen now. We're going to see for the journalists like me are going to be. We're probably going to have to get 4 hours ahead of every particular job because the security is going to go completely the other way.
They do not get the protection of the American taxpayer. That point landed hard and pushed this whole controversy into another lane. Trump doubled down, saying if Harry wants security, he pays for it like any wealthy private citizen. A foreign national on a visa, not someone operating under special royal privilege. And critics say that statement ripped apart the polished image of public service Harry has tried to project. Behind the glossy PR shots and those heavily staged tours to places like Nigeria and Colombia, a very different story has been brewing. Harry has been caught in what many describe as a brutal legal fight tied to his US residency, while pressure has grown around possible scrutiny of immigration records, including past statements about substance use. That angle alone sparked huge speculation and sent the drama into overdrive. And this is where people say the real tension shows. Critics argue the Sussex brand has worked hard to hide a difficult reality. Without the Crown's shield, they face the same pressures as any other high-profile private couple. Taxes, legal disputes, immigration questions, all of it. That image of untouchable status suddenly looked a lot more fragile. Palace frustration reportedly goes even deeper, because some insiders view Harry's recent moves as strategic, even psychological. Right as King Charles and Queen Camilla prepared for a major US visit meant to reinforce the special relationship, the Sussex camp announced they would not be involved due to scheduling conflicts, but some saw that as something else entirely, not absence, but positioning. Critics claimed it looked like an effort to turn exclusion into choice. The idea, they say, was to make it appear Harry was too occupied with his own royal-style responsibilities to meet his father, almost creating the image of a parallel court. And that sparked serious talk that every headline about the King's visit could end up pulling Harry back into the centre of the story.
I suspect that it'll be a successful visit in terms of the special relationship. But you've got to remember, we are here to mark the 250th anniversary of them kicking out King George's ancestor, George III, as monarch. So, it's not always been that great a special relationship. We did come back and burn down the White House. So, look, I think that, that's recent history where we're looking at, the World War II in particular, more than anything. And so I think that there'll be a conversations in private with the King and Trump. I'm sure that they both respect each other. They both know they've got a job to do. But, anything that's said about Starmer will remain private, at least I think while the King is here, because that would cause a bit of an embarrassment for the King. I don't think Trump wants to do that.
Some royal watchers even called it shadow diplomacy, and they point to the Sandringham Agreement, arguing this kind of unofficial royal-style activity crosses lines long considered settled. Even Harry's repeated use of the word service, especially in interviews like Good Morning America, has been read by critics as highly symbolic. They say it blurs public understanding, especially when tours in Nigeria and Colombia carried what looked to some like state-level treatment despite no formal status. Then came the bigger accusation that the Sussexes were trying to create a fait accompli, building a presence so visible and so established that by the time King Charles reached America, Harry might be seen less as an outsider and more like a competing power centre. That is where the stakes looked huge. But many believe April 2026 changed everything. Reports of a final severance were framed as shutting down that strategy for good, and with Prince William taking a stronger role in defending the institution and pushing a slimmed-down monarchy model, insiders say the family is drawing much tougher boundaries now. The battle over image, influence and royal identity just got even more intense. That slimmed-down monarchy vision draws a hard line. The Sussexes may still be blood relatives, but critics say the institution now treats them as outsiders.
Well, that's not been confirmed. I mean, obviously, there's certain areas of this visit I can't talk about because they haven't got the security clearance at this particular time. But that hasn't been. All I can say at the moment is I don't know how she knows that.
Reports claim the palace made it crystal clear: no meetings, no private lunches, no special recognition for Harry during the King's visit. The inner circle closed tight, and after Trump's public takedown of Harry's status, many saw that as powerful validation of the palace's position on both sides of the Atlantic. Some commentators went even further, saying, Harry is no longer a real player on the diplomatic chessboard, a royal without official weight, a figure trying to speak like a statesman while facing pushback from the very political forces he challenged. To critics, that was the moment the PR war shifted hard, with the House of Windsor appearing to come out cold, disciplined, and in control. But that was only Phase 1. Phase 2, according to political observers and constitutional voices, is about dismantling what they call the shadow diplomatic image Harry and Meghan spent years building. Some have even described this as the collapse of the so-called pseudo-royal era, and that phrase alone set off huge debate. The palace, according to insiders, has leaned into a brutal strategy, strategic silence mixed with precise leaks. And that combo has reportedly stripped away the ambiguity the Sussexes once benefited from. For years, Harry operated in a grey zone, not fully a working royal, but still carrying symbolic royal weight. Critics say that grey zone has now been wiped clean by coordinated pressure, involving both British institutions and changing dynamics in Washington.
And seemed to be, for instance, going on what looked like philanthropic trips, but at the same time, Meghan Markle's then been attempting to flog copies of the clothes she was wearing that day on an internet site that she herself has now invested in. What the Queen didn't want to happen, i.e., those two using their royal titles to try and spin some profit, it seems to be exactly what's happening now.
And suddenly those self-styled diplomatic-style trips to international capitals are being looked at in a very different light. What supporters called relevance building, critics are calling image projects, even vanity missions. Those tours, some insiders allegedly labelled fraudulent tours, were said to create a visual story of influence through motorcades, elite receptions, and high-profile appearances that looked far more official than critics believed they were. That is where the accusations got explosive. Some say the Sussexes were trying to move around the authority of the Crown itself, building an alternate lane of influence. But observers say the game has changed now. Reports claim the palace quietly sent a firm signal through British embassies and high commissions. Harry and Meghan travel as private individuals. No official mandate, no message carried on behalf of the king, and any honours or ceremonial treatment they receive are personal courtesies, not acts tied to the British state. That distinction may sound technical, but in royal power politics, critics say it changes everything. This loss of standing looked even more dramatic when Donald Trump stepped into the fight with a wave of sharp public remarks. Critics say that changed the whole power dynamic overnight. By focusing on the legal vulnerability of Harry's status in America, Trump pushed the story out of royal gossip and into serious political territory. The contrast was impossible to miss. A working royal on official state business carries diplomatic protections, but Harry, as critics pointed out, is operating as a private individual under US immigration law. Then came the immigration pressure, and that sent shockwaves. Trump publicly questioned the integrity of Harry's immigration application, pointing to Harry's own past admissions about substance use, an issue critics say raised uncomfortable legal questions. That move was seen as a direct hit on Harry's sense of security, with a message many interpreted as brutal. The royal name does not place anyone above the normal rules applied to foreign nationals, and that is where the civilian reality hit hard. Without diplomatic immunity or state-backed protections, the Sussexes face the same scrutiny over taxes, compliance, and legal exposure as any wealthy immigrant family.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a royal editor of the Sunrise show in Australia. I know Australia quite well. I didn't go in this one because I'm a royal editor. I don't cover sort of non-working royals that well, actually. So they were described as non-working royals. However, I would say this, that there is a problem for the royal family going forward because the size of the crowds were big and the media attention towards Meghan and Harry was huge. Now, I know that we at this end are saying, oh, well, we should ignore them. And we should, and I didn't go down there to cover the story.
To critics, this was no longer just a fight over image. It was turning into a struggle over legal vulnerability and survival. Commentators say Trump's rhetoric stripped away the aura of prestige and forced attention onto something far more ordinary, a couple navigating American law without royal machinery smoothing the road. And next to the formal state visit of King Charles, some framed Harry's separate positioning as a striking contrast. Institutional power on one side, personal ambition on the other. Harry's decision to stay away from the King's visit, citing scheduling conflicts, drew even more heat. Senior courtiers, according to reports, mocked it as a transparent, defensive move. Some palace leaks even suggested that if Harry had sought a meeting, it may have been rejected over concerns tied to national interest and message discipline. That claim added even more fuel to the fire, because for the palace, the King's mission is about representing the British state and the Commonwealth with total clarity, and critics argue Harry's presence would risk dragging media drama into an official diplomatic agenda. Some insiders even described him as a source of media pollution, saying his involvement could only distract from the mission. Then came the psychological angle, and this part got savage. Some observers argued Harry was trying to reject the king before the king could publicly reject him, a defensive chess move meant to save face. But critics in diplomatic circles reportedly saw right through it, calling it a weak gambit that failed to impress serious players in Washington. And the controversy did not stop there. The Sussexes have also faced accusations from critics that non-profit activity has at times blurred into political influence work, something royal traditionalists fiercely push back against. Their advocacy around issues like speech policy and environmental debates has drawn criticism from constitutional conservatives.
But they are getting attention and they're getting traction. This is exactly why the Queen said you can't be half in, half out, and you can't be a signed up full working royal if that's the case, because ultimately the monarchy has to. It's getting enough money from the taxpayer anyway with all the security it's paid for. You can't start, adding bits on and saying, we get paid for appearances, and then boost it by investing in companies that are set to flogging your wares. It's ridiculous, and they must realise that. Unless I know that Harry's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he knows exactly what he's doing.
Who argue those moves push too close to political lobbying. That charge has only made this clash feel even bigger. Not just royal drama anymore, but a fight over influence, power, and legitimacy itself. The palace has reportedly made one thing very clear: using the Sussex title to gain access to high-level political circles in the US crosses a serious line. Critics say this cuts right to the heart of the grievance. The argument is simple but explosive. Harry is using a title tied to a system he no longer serves, to play in arenas he's no longer authorised to represent. And as April 2026 unfolds, many say that door is being slammed shut for good. What once looked like family tension is now being framed as something much bigger, a permanent break with geopolitical consequences. Palace insiders and commentators have painted Harry as a man out of sync with the role he once held, trying to speak on democratic duties in America, while still carrying a hereditary title from abroad. Critics have called that contradiction the height of hypocrisy, and that charge has only intensified. Then Trump's blunt remarks poured gasoline on it. His framing of Harry as just a man with a famous name, an uncertain legal footing, struck a nerve with audiences tired of non-stop royal drama. To critics, that was not just a dig, it was a demolition of the California shadow court image. Some now say that world of symbolic diplomacy around Harry and Meghan is not just weakening, it is being pushed out altogether. And that has led to an even harsher narrative. Some royal analysts say Harry and Meghan are no longer being viewed as an active branch of the House of Windsor.
But also, how problematic is it, for want of a better phrase, that someone like Prince Harry, he's still got the title Prince, of course, but he's not a working royal, and yet the monarchy in this country represents our head of state, went along to Ukraine and seemed to make a sort of veiled, barbed comment about perhaps the lack of American involvement in that war. This is essentially a rogue member of our royal family meddling in foreign affairs decisions.
But as a warning about what happens when celebrity ambition collides with institutional power. That is a brutal storyline, and it has been gaining traction. Analysts have also pointed to what they describe as a recurring pattern: tactical leaks, surprise announcements, carefully timed media moves from the Sussex PR orbit that critics say often appear when working royals launch major missions, and they argue this is not random timing. It is part of a deliberate parallel narrative challenging the authority of the throne. According to that view, whenever King Charles or Prince William steps into a major speech, tour, or global moment, another competing storyline seems to rise out of California. Critics say the strategy is to force the public into a choice: traditional monarchy or a celebrity-powered alternative Harry is trying to market to America. And then came one of the most explosive claims yet: talk of a so-called shadow diplomatic network. Some reports suggest former advisors and PR strategists have been used to move around official channels, building influence outside the palace structure. Critics say this network has helped push selective information to sympathetic biographers, shaping Harry as the wounded outsider fighting a cold establishment, But that victim narrative, some argue, has taken damage because of the sheer aggressiveness of recent moves. Critics say the image of quiet exile does not fit when Harry is stepping into headline-making geopolitical spaces, and many point to Kyiv as the clearest example. That appearance was framed by critics as the ultimate overreach, not just symbolic activism, but a dramatic attempt to project relevance on a global stage. And in the eyes of opponents, that was the moment the strategy stopped looking bold and started looking reckless. By stepping into a highly sensitive conflict zone and delivering political-style demands touching the United States, Harry was seen by critics as trying to cast himself as a global power broker. The move looked huge, almost like an attempt to create a fait accompli, where the world would start treating him as the truly relevant royal, while the king appeared merely ceremonial.
Well, you're spot on, Alice. I mean, number one, in Australia, of course, the king's not only the king of this country, he's the king of Australia. So Harry going down there and having security being paid for by the Australian taxpayer, not the British taxpayer, that's just as problematic for the king. On the second point, he's now living in America with his American citizen wife, and obviously she clearly supports the Democratic Party or the Meghan Party. Maybe she's going to stand one day, who knows? But the reality is, Harry, by going very partisan, is embarrassing his father just before he arrives.
But then came Trump's intervention, and many say that was the hard reality check this media strategy never saw coming. Because critics argue Trump exposed the biggest flaw in the plan. Influence means little in high-stakes diplomacy without sovereign authority behind it. In global power politics, words carry weight when backed by the force and legitimacy of a state. And Trump's blunt framing of Harry as a private citizen with no representative mandate hit right at the center of Harry's image. To critics, that stripped away Harry's most valuable asset, the illusion of influence without official government backing. Suddenly, those speeches looked, in that framing, less like diplomacy and more like celebrity commentary. And Trump was quick to hammer what supporters saw as unfair, but critics called obvious: the irony of a foreign national lecturing Americans while facing questions about his own status in the country. And while the political drama exploded, another struggle was becoming harder to hide. Commentators say the financial and legal pressures of the Sussexes' independent life are growing more visible by the day. Without the protections tied to working royals, the costs of security, global travel, and legal battles can be staggering. That reality has fueled even more scrutiny. Some palace insiders even note with grim irony that while Harry and Meghan project effortless royal glamour, critics say they are actually fighting a non-stop battle to secure their commercial future. That contrast has become a major talking point. And then there is the branding issue, and this part has sparked huge debate. Critics point to continued reliance on the Sussex title across public-facing projects and personal platforms as proof the royal connection still drives enormous value. And they say that reveals a central contradiction. Claiming freedom from the institution while still drawing power from its symbols, that accusation has hit hard. Inside the royal family, reports suggest the mood has shifted too, especially with Prince William, who insiders say has moved from frustration to full institutional defense mode. He is reportedly pushing to keep the king's US visit completely untouched by Sussex drama, and critics say the palace strategy now is simple: total containment, and that strategy looks ruthless in its discipline. By refusing to react to provocations and defining Harry strictly as a private person, the palace is said to have sharply reduced his ability to create institutional disruption. No public war, no emotional back and forth, just boundaries, cold and firm. And the message critics say is emerging could not be clearer.
On what I believe is one of the most important missions of his short reign, and it's difficult enough as it is, without these sort of silly comments from Harry. I'm not saying I disagree with what Harry said, but the timing is wrong, and it doesn't help. You can't, again, it's a question of wanting your cake and eat it. That's what it basically boils down to here. He wants to have the attention of a prince to make these statements, but yet he wants to be a private person, and he wants to make his money and be paid for such appearances. Let's be very, very blunt. If he was just a retired army captain, no one would give a damn.
Harry can speak, but he does not speak for the crown. He can travel, but he does not carry the flag. He can use the title of Duke, but in the eyes of the state, opponents argue, he is treated as a private foreign national navigating ordinary American realities. And in royal power politics, critics say that distinction changes everything. As the King and Queen prepare for a state dinner at the White House, the contrast being drawn could not look more dramatic. On one side, the King surrounded by ceremony, protocol, and the full recognition of two powerful nations. On the other, critics say Harry is left at a distance, pointing to a busy schedule, while opponents claim the bigger truth is he was never part of the invitation circle to begin with. And that is where many say the real picture of Harry's situation comes into focus. Critics argue this absence is not some power move made from strength, but a retreat shaped by lack of access. The idea of being too busy for the king has been mocked by opponents as a hollow cover story, and they say the international crowd can see the difference. Official constitutional power on one side, celebrity-driven relevance on the other. Then comes April 2026, which some are calling a constitutional turning point. Commentators say these changes could lock in the exclusion of non-working royals from anything tied to state business, putting an end to the era of pseudo-royal tours once and for all. If that happens, critics argue Harry's attempts to build a parallel diplomatic image, including outreach to American political circles, face pressure from both British constitutional structure and hard US political realities. And to some observers, that means the PR war has moved toward a brutal conclusion. They argue the lesson being pushed is simple. A title without a function carries only symbolic weight. And in that framing, Harry's old royal identity starts looking more like a ghost of a former life than an active force in the present. But critics say this goes beyond image damage. They call it a full institutional purge. What some insiders reportedly describe as the Great Clarification is being framed as the systematic stripping away of ambiguity, where lingering titles and half-in, half-out associations are replaced by one hard label: private citizen. And here is where the palace strategy is said to have changed dramatically. No longer defensive, now offensive, not reacting, but moving to protect the institution itself from what critics describe as exploitation of royal symbolism for commercial and political gain. That language is intense, and it shows just how high the stakes have become. Then the focus shifts to lobbying efforts in America, and this part gets explosive. Reports claim advisors around Harry, including figures with backgrounds in major US political campaigns, have explored ways to secure some form of unique diplomatic-style recognition for the couple, despite lacking formal official standing. That claim triggered huge debate. Critics say the goal was to gain protections and elite-level access more commonly associated with heads of state, all framed through non-profit work and global service initiatives. And if true, opponents argue that would have been a massive power play. But according to these reports, the palace worked quietly with the British Foreign Office to make sure the US State Department had no confusion at all about Harry's status.
Well, no, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, are we going to at any point be privileged and honoured enough to have them return back to Britain?
Well, that'll be a matter really for the king. I think if he chose, I mean, they are still members of his family, but they're not. And it's been made very clear that they're not really taking part in proper official engagements. But if they decide to do that, I think that my personal opinion, and I've done 35 years of this, is Her Majesty, the late Queen, is a very wise woman, and she understood the situation better than anyone, even better than our current king. And she was very clear in the decision that was made. You can't be half in, you can't be half out. Now, to change that now, I think, given what's gone on, Oprah Winfrey, the books, the cashing in, how can we possibly trust?
Message delivered. No mandate, no official diplomatic role, no alternate lane around the rules. And that may be the biggest theme of all in this saga. Every move critics say was meant to build a shadow power structure is now meeting institutional resistance from both London and Washington. And in that clash, the battle is no longer just about reputation, it is about who gets recognised as holding real authority. The official position, as critics describe it, has become absolute. Harry does not represent the king. He does not represent the United Kingdom, and he is to be treated as a private resident with no special privileges attached to royal status. That message, observers say, could not be more direct. Then Trump's intervention poured even more intensity into the story. Critics say he sped up the stripping away of the royal veneer by openly mocking the idea of Harry as some global leader. Trump's argument hit hard. True leadership comes from a public mandate or a throne, and critics point out he argued Harry holds neither. That framing pushed the debate into another level entirely. And then came the immigration angle, which made the pressure feel even heavier. By raising questions about Harry's residency and possible scrutiny over visa matters, Trump, critics say, turned Harry's visibility from an advantage into a liability. What once looked like celebrity reach suddenly looked in this framing like exposure. That threat of legal scrutiny forced what some call a defensive posture. Critics say it highlighted the brutal contrast of a man once moving with princely privilege, now facing the same immigration questions any ordinary foreign resident could face. That image has fueled endless controversy, but the legal pressure is only one part of it. At the same time, the palace is said to be redefining what the royal family even means in practical terms. Supporters of the slimmed-down monarchy argue it is not just about cost-cutting, it is a strategic move to separate the institution from anyone seen as commercializing the crown, and that is where April 2026 keeps coming back into focus. Some reports claim upcoming mandates could restrict or even end the use of royal symbols and Sussex branding in commercial contexts. If that happens, critics say it strikes right at the centre of Harry's financial model. Because without selling the royal connection to media giants, publishers and global deals, many believe the Sussex brand takes a huge hit. Some observers even say the palace has built a trap. Titles may remain in name, but their commercial power could be boxed in. And if true, that changes everything. Critics say this move also exposes what they believe has driven much of the Sussex strategy since leaving the UK.
This young couple, or they're not that young, in their 40s, are young to me, but how can we trust them not to monetize if they're coming back? And how do we trust them to say things that are not on the grid, if you like? The monarchy is a part of our system of government. We have a constitutional monarchy, a parliamentary democracy. I don't think that Harry's particularly been reading up on his constitutional history. It just seems to be more of a Kardashian than a Windsor.
Not just independence, but monetization. That accusation has become a huge part of the battle. Then there is the media warfare angle, and this part gets wild. Palace watchers have pointed to a pattern where Sussex announcements, trailers, launches, charitable headlines seem to appear during major moments for Prince William or the King. Critics have labelled that media sabotage, saying it is designed to compete with official royal business. But opponents say that strategy now looks desperate, not powerful. Because as some critics put it, someone who truly has a parallel court does not need to draft off his brother's calendar for attention. That line has been repeated a lot, and it stings. And the palace response, critics argue, has been ruthless in its precision. By surrounding the king's visits with major diplomatic significance, trade, security, statecraft, they make Sussex PR moves look small, flashy, even self-indulgent by comparison. That contrast was reportedly on full display in recent preparations. While the King's team was said to be discussing trade arrangements and security cooperation with American officials, reports claimed Harry's side was struggling to secure meetings, even with regional political figures. Some reportedly cautious about appearing aligned with anything seen as rivaling the official British mission. And that contrast, critics say, says it all. One side operating through institutions and state power, the other fighting for relevance through optics and access. And in a battle like that, symbolism alone may not be enough. The world, critics say, is watching the slow but steady erasure of Harry from the global power structure. A figure once tied to monarchy is now, in this framing, being pushed towards celebrity gossip territory and away from the serious worlds of the Oval Office and Westminster. That contrast has become impossible to ignore, and some observers argue the palace has a much bigger endgame: total institutional severance by the end of April 2026. Not just legal distance, not just financial separation, but psychological separation too, a complete break in every sense. Reports suggest the King and Prince William have signalled the era of olive branches may be over. Critics say the focus now is not reconciliation, but protecting the survival and prestige of the monarchy as a national institution. And in that climate, attempts to stay in headlines through family tensions are said to be hitting a wall, because many say the palace's strongest weapon right now is silence, not reacting, not engaging, not feeding the cycle. And critics argue that silence sends one brutal message: Harry is no longer central to the institution's conversation. That is a cold move, and some say incredibly effective. To opponents, this has become a hard lesson in what happens when someone steps away from the crown's spotlight. Outside that structure, the symbolism fades fast and ordinary pressures take over. That theme keeps coming back.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Do you think things about the way that those two are handled will dramatically change when William becomes king? Because I get the impression that King Charles is naturally a lot more torn. That's his son he's talking about there. He also seems to be somebody who doesn't like controversy, doesn't like conflict, doesn't like confrontation. Whereas I get the distinct impression that if William had his way, he would be making much firmer decisions regarding what to do about Harry and Meghan.
But this story is not just about family fallout. Critics say it is also about the collapse of Sussex influence in American political circles. For years, Harry and Meghan were seen as building relationships with powerful political figures to reinforce an image of global relevance. That was part of the strategy many believed gave them weight. Now, some observers argue the changing political climate in America has exposed how fragile those ties may have been. As constitutional realities and legal questions have grown louder, critics say parts of Washington's political elite have started creating distance from the Sussex orbit, and that has fueled talk that the era of the unverified royal is over. Traditional statecraft, critics say, is reasserting itself, and symbolism without official authority is running out of room. Then comes Trump's role, which many call a major catalyst in this shift. His direct and very public intervention pushed Harry's status into a broader law and order debate, and that changed the stakes dramatically. It was no longer celebrity chatter, it became political. Critics say Trump stripped away the celebrity shield that once softened scrutiny around Harry. By framing him not as a royal figure, but as a foreign national subject to immigration and tax law, opponents argue he turned Harry's status into a vulnerability rather than an advantage. And that, many say, created a hostile climate for what critics have labelled Sussex shadow diplomacy. Because once influence is tested against law, institutions and state power, symbolism alone can start looking very thin. That is why some observers say this is not just the decline of a personal brand, it is the collapse of a whole parallel power project. And in that reading, Harry is not simply being criticised, he is being edged out of the very arena he tried to enter. Critics say this has pushed Harry into a corner, forced to navigate a legal system no longer assumed to give him the benefit of the doubt, and that has changed the whole atmosphere around him. The possibility of scrutiny over residency issues has become, in this framing, a harsh reminder that the special relationship between the UK and the US belongs to the Crown and the state, not to a private individual living outside official structures. The palace, according to reports, has used this political shift to reinforce the boundaries laid down in the Sandringham Agreement, and that is where things get serious. Some claims suggest the British government, working alongside the royal household, has quietly briefed international partners that the Duke of Sussex carries no official standing in diplomatic matters. Critics say that move was designed to stop any use of the Sussex title to influence policy or gain access to sensitive political discussions. The signal being sent was sharp. Engagement with Harry is personal, not governmental, and carries no official weight in the eyes of the British state, and observers say that message has had ripple effects. Some point to a cooling in relationships with political figures in America, governors, senators, major players who once welcomed the reflected prestige of royal association. Critics argue that enthusiasm has faded as institutional boundaries hardened. Then there is the financial pressure, and this part has become a huge talking point. Palace watchers have pointed to what they call growing strain beneath recent Sussex PR moves, arguing the costs of maintaining a royal-style global image without Crown support are enormous. Security, travel, staff, legal teams, all of it adds up fast. And that is where Harry's push to be treated with high-level diplomatic significance is colliding with reality, critics say, because every convoy, every protection detail.
Well, I mean, first of all, I say God save the King. The man is working very hard for our country, and I hope he has a long and illustrious reign. When it comes to William, we'll wait and see. My personal belief is a father is always torn when it comes to their children, and you forgive them pretty much everything. Maybe you shouldn't, but I mean, I know I would. But this is not about just being a dad. This is about being a king, and the Queen in the 90s made a very clear decision when she was on the top job, and that top was to say, no, you can't do it, Harry. Now she's dead, sadly, and we have a new king. And now that, it seems to me that Harry is just ignoring what he agreed with his grandmother and rewriting the contract of the Sandringham Summit. Now, that really is unacceptable and shows disrespect.
Every elite logistical setup now comes at private expense. That changes the game completely. Trump has been especially outspoken here. Critics point to his argument that American taxpayers should not fund protection for someone who does not represent a sovereign state. And that line landed hard because it turned a prestige issue into a dollars and cents argument the public instantly understands. Some observers say that financial squeeze is actually part of the broader institutional severance, because it forces a brutal choice: preserve status symbolism or preserve wealth. And critics argue that pressure is doing as much damage as any political blow. Then there is the psychological layer, and many say this is where the tension is peaking. Palace insiders have reportedly viewed some of Harry's recent moves as self-preservation, driven by fear of fading relevance. That interpretation has fueled a whole new level of speculation. Take the timing around the King's visit. Critics say the conflict of interest explanation and claims of scheduling issues looked less like independence and more like cover for exclusion from the official guest list. And that accusation hit hard, because opponents argue the move was meant to preserve an illusion, that Harry stands as a peer to the King rather than a subject outside the institution. But critics say that illusion is getting much harder to sustain, and in a battle over status, perception can collapse fast. However, critics say the world has already seen through that facade. The absence of any official interaction between the King and Harry during the state visit has been framed as public confirmation that the Duke is out of the inner circle, and the palace's refusal to offer even the smallest olive branch has only fueled claims that reconciliation is no longer on the table. As April 2026 approaches, attention has shifted to what some describe as a final severance framework. Reports suggest this agreement could serve as the legal foundation for a completely redefined relationship between the monarchy and the Sussexes. And critics say it may include strict limits on the use of royal imagery and titles in any way that could imply representation of the state. That would be huge, because insiders claim King Charles and Prince William are fully aligned on one core principle: the dignity of the institution must be protected at all costs. And in that view, Harry's effort to build what critics call a parallel court failed for one simple reason. It lacked the one thing monarchy depends on: state recognition. And that has led to a brutal conclusion many commentators keep repeating. Harry may have stepped away from the royal family, but critics say he could not take the power of the institution with him. That distinction has become central to this whole clash. Some observers frame him now as a man carrying a title whose meaning has been drained by separation from official power, standing in a future entirely of his own making. And in that reading, April 2026 marks not just another chapter, but a closing act. Because critics say the monarchy has moved beyond statements and symbolism into something far more permanent, a legal and constitutional framework redefining who sits inside the royal boundary and who does not. That is a much bigger move than palace drama. This is what many link to the slimmed-down monarchy strategy, driven by King Charles and Prince William. Supporters say it is designed to shield the throne from future commercial exploitation and any repeat of shadow diplomacy controversies, And if true, that means the palace has shifted from damage control into full institutional command. Critics argue that shift leaves Harry and Meghan increasingly isolated on the world stage, no longer treated as a complicated royal offshoot, but as private figures operating outside the machinery of state. Then comes what some call the biggest development of all, the final severance agreement. Commentators say this historic mandate strips away the last traces of official standing Harry may have held, even while he retains the Duke title by birth. And that distinction matters, because critics argue keeping a title in name is not the same as keeping any legal or diplomatic function attached to it. Reports suggest any use of that title connected to state business or international diplomacy could be fully shut down. If so, that is a massive line in the sand. And the palace message, as critics frame it, is brutally simple. Harry may remain blood family, but institutionally, he is a stranger. That phrase has become loaded with meaning.
Each time I return, I feel something that is difficult to describe. But it is impossible to ignore. It is a sense of clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what is at stake. And clarity about who is carrying that burden.
Because it shapes not only family boundaries, but how foreign governments and international bodies are expected to engage with the Sussexes moving forward. And in royal power politics, critics say that kind of distinction changes everything. The message from the British Foreign Office, as critics frame it, is final and uncompromising. There is no path back to royal duties, and no recognition for any independent diplomatic-style initiatives coming out of California. To many observers, that sounds like the door has been shut and locked, and critics say Donald Trump's role in driving that finality cannot be ignored. By repeatedly stressing Harry's lack of diplomatic immunity and raising questions around the fragility of his legal standing in the United States, Trump added outside pressure to a process already unfolding inside the palace. That made this feel bigger than family conflict. It looked geopolitical. Some commentators argue Trump provided the external force that helped validate the palace's internal decisions, and the possibility of deeper scrutiny over Harry's immigration status became, in that framing, a blunt reminder that without the Crown's protection, he faces the same laws and oversight as any other foreign resident. Trump's blunt line that Harry is not a royal representative struck a nerve too. Critics say it resonated with an American audience growing less invested in the Sussex narrative, and that has fed the idea that the couple's once powerful brand is now under pressure from two fronts at once: the institution they left and the government system of the country they chose as home. And then there is the King's state visit, where critics say the palace quietly exposed the truth behind Harry's absence. While Sussex PR reportedly tried to frame it as a scheduling choice, opponents argue the official record shows Harry was never part of the diplomatic equation in the first place. That distinction hit hard, because critics say the palace's refusal to acknowledge Harry during the visit and refusal to grant any private audience was the clearest signal yet of exclusion from the inner circle. To many observers, that was not a scheduling issue. It was a statement, a cold institutional statement, and in royal politics, critics say silence like that can speak louder than any press release. This was not a clash of schedules at all. Critics say it was a deliberate act of institutional shunning, and that made the message impossible to miss. The King's visit to America, carried out with full state power, ceremony, and diplomatic weight, made Harry's so-called pseudo-royal activities look, to opponents, small and scrambling by comparison. And in the middle of all this, Prince William has emerged, critics say, as the driving force behind a tougher era of royal discipline. His hard line against turning the monarchy into a celebrity brand has been framed as a move to protect the House of Windsor as a symbol of duty and national service, not commercial fame. Some observers even call the closing of the Sussex Shadow Court a direct reflection of William's long-game strategy, by cutting off the royal prestige critics say Harry and Meghan relied on for influence and branding. The palace has moved to ensure the Sussex image slowly fades into the wider world of ordinary celebrity culture. And that may be the biggest twist of all. After years of chaos, scandal, and non-stop headlines, critics argue the House of Windsor now looks more unified and focused than it has in years. They say the institutional severance of April 2026 brought the clarity the monarchy wanted, a clean path forward without constant Sussex drama pulling attention away. That leaves Harry and Meghan, in this telling, facing a very different reality. No longer central players in a royal saga, but private individuals responsible for their own security, their own finances, and their own legacy. And critics say that is the final transformation, because in the end, the crown has spoken, and its message, opponents argue, was final. The era of the pseudo-royal is over, and the real power of monarchy, they say, remains where it has always been, with the sovereign and the state. But what do you think? Is this truly the final chapter? Or is there another royal twist coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this story is far from forgotten. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more royal drama,